Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
Yes, I would like to know if we have confirmation as to when Minister Boissonnault will be coming to our committee.
We do not.
Because I think we need to have that as soon as possible, because many people in Jasper have many questions that need to be answered.
We're working on it and trying to get a confirmation as soon as possible. So good afternoon, colleagues, witnesses. We are continuing our study of the factors leading to the recent fires in Jasper National Park. We have with us for the first panel from the Alberta Forest Products Association's Senior Vice President Brock Mulligan, who's here in person. From the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, we have Heather Sweet, MLA, Edmonton Manning, who's joining us via video conference. From the Bighorn Stoney First Nation, we have Barry Wesley, Consultation Officer and Traditional Knowledge Keeper, and from the Lac St. Anne Métis Community Association, also by video conference, Dr. Tracy Friedel, the President. So we'll start with Mr. Mulligan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for a bit of context on the Alberta Forest Products Association, or AFPA, we represent 29 forestry companies in Alberta, and our members range all the way from publicly listed companies to family-run businesses that have been passed down from generation to generation. Our members sustainably harvest timber, mostly on public land, and make high-quality products that are in demand here in Canada and around the world. We also play a significant role in managing, sustaining, and caring for Alberta's forests. Sustainability is the key to our business. While companies that are 80 to 100 years old are the exception to the rule in other industries, they're the norm in forestry. It's only possible because companies plan decades in advance, plant more trees than they harvest, and take care of the land. And in Alberta, forest companies plant over 100 million seedlings annually and grow roughly 3 trees for every one that's harvested. For many years, we've been deeply concerned about the situation in Jasper. While our members don't typically operate in the park, they operate on adjacent lands and care for and manage those forests. Unhealthy forests in the park affect neighboring forests and increase the risk of fires and pine beetle infestations that know no borders or boundaries. The other day, I dug up a newspaper article that we wrote in 2017 predicting that the next major fire would be in Hinton or Jasper. And sadly, we were right. We expressed concern about the combination of pine beetle and increasingly warm, dry summers and unmanaged forests within the park. We talked about how fires are a natural part of the forest cycle in this area of the world, but they're dangerous when around communities and people. Even more so when we have these hot and dry summers and increasingly volatile fires. The majority of forests across Canada have evolved through disturbance. It's certainly prudent to extinguish fires from a community safety perspective, but it's resulted in unnaturally old forests and volatile conditions. We believe that harvesting and replanting forests is a safer alternative to fires. Uniformly old forests are much more at risk than forests with a more natural mix of age composition for fires, and we can create that mix through active forest management. We also believe that there's a fundamental flaw in the Government of Canada's approach to forest management. And this flaw is the belief that overmature forests should not be managed, even if they are aging and at risk of catastrophic fires. This is exactly the situation in Jasper, and sadly, that risk was realized. Not only does the belief that forests should be preserved in an unnatural state seem to be entrenched in national parks policy, it's extended to provincial lands through legislation like the Species at Risk Act. Right now in Alberta, companies are prevented from managing and operating in large tracts of older, overmature forests because of caribou. But the reality is, just like Jasper, these forests are at risk of catastrophic fires. And when those fires happen, it will be bad for communities, it'll be bad for caribou, and it'll be bad for the sustainability of industries that operate on the land base. For us, this exercise isn't about looking back, it's about forging a collaborative path forward, a path that protects the communities we live in and love, land we cherish, and the forests that sustain us. We believe unequivocally that path involves more active management of our forests, looking at which areas are at risk of becoming the next Jasper, and taking steps like harvesting and replanting with younger trees, which are much less at risk of fire. We believe it involves taking a hard look at any policies or legislation that are preventing that work. Policies in national parks and the Species at Risk Act are both in urgent need of reform. And we believe the path involves a cooperative approach and open communication. Conversations on the management of our forests need to happen between all levels of government, Indigenous communities, industry, and other users of the land. They need to leverage the expertise of foresters and people who live on the land and the perspectives of local communities. And they need to happen urgently. Let's not waste this opportunity to begin those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mulligan. We'll go now to Ms. Sweet for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It is a pleasure to be with you here today, and thank you for inviting me. I am joining you from Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory and the home of the Métis people who share a deep connection to this land. I was saddened by the tragic Jasper fire, the loss of wildland firefighter Morgan Kitchen, the loss of homes and businesses, and the emotional toll on the people of Jasper. But I would like to focus on two aspects of the Jasper fire and ways that we, as legislators, can move forward in a nonpartisan, collaborative way. The first being enhancement of FireSmart, and the second being the development of an economic recovery program that will ensure the financial success of the residents and local businesses that are still operating in Jasper. Alberta has a program that focuses on wildfire resilience based in science, and it works. The FireSmart program must see significant increase in financial and policy level supports from all levels of government. There needs to be a strong focus on supporting homeowner level improvements with the home ignition zone, which focuses on the homes itself and everything within 30 meters of the home. Research has shown that up to 90% of the structures are lost to ember ignitions during wildland-urban interface events. In Jasper, fire within the community was started by ember ignitions. This quickly led to structure-to-structure ignition, overwhelming the capability of firefighter resources within the community. The Government of Canada has offered green energy grants to homeowners in the past, and a similar grant program needs to be established to support homeowners with adapting their homes to be more resilient to the impact of not only wildfire, but the broader impacts of changing climates. The National Research Council published the National Guide to Wildland-Urban Interface Fires in 2020. These measures have not yet been adopted into the national or provincial building codes, and this needs to change. The Government of Canada needs to expedite the implementation and incorporation of these construction measures into the National Building Code. We need to build for our changing climate and ensure that new buildings in an at-risk area are adapted to withstand the impacts of wildfire. As we rebuild Jasper, these codes should be followed with funding from all levels of government to bridge over the loss that will happen with insurance companies. There is a defined need for better access to wildland firefighting training for municipal structural firefighters. The Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs passed a resolution in late September on this very issue. We need to leverage the training capacity and capabilities of our structural fire services with well-established and capable training programs to ensure that all firefighters across Canada are trained to a national standard. Fuel vegetation needs to be encouraged, fuel management needs to occur on much larger scales, fuel reduction in buffer zones around communities on both public and private lands. Alberta staffing models and structure for wildland firefighting is not sustainable. With short employment contracts of 4 to 6 months, low wages, extremely limited long-term career opportunities within wildfire management agencies, it is growing increasingly difficult to adequately recruit and retain wildland firefighters. Wildland firefighter crews are less experienced and are being asked to respond to more challenging wildfires for extended periods of time without adequate time for rest and recovery. This is putting our firefighters at much greater risk of injury and on-line duty fatalities. On a broader level, the overall Canadian model is also facing challenges. In 2023, provinces across Canada all had extreme wildfire activity. Resources were not available to share across provincial borders, and many fires were under-resourced. Between May 1st and August 31st, the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre listed 113 days at level 5. All available wildland firefighter resources were committed, and no resources were available to support provinces. Many international partners came to our aid. However, this reliance on international support comes at a great financial expense to the province and to Ottawa. We need to do more to build capacity within our own wildland firefighting industry. In relation to economic recovery of Jasper, it is important that all levels of government work together to develop an economic response program. Jasper is an isolated community with a heavy reliance on tourism. Businesses make most of their revenue in high season during the summer months when tourists flood in from across the country and the world. Starting July 22nd, most of the revenue was lost. That's 3 months of high season revenue gone, just like that, putting a serious strain on local business. We have seen other jurisdictions when fire has impacted a community that they often find economic stability through these resources. I appreciate the call for housing, but I would also encourage that without employment opportunities in Jasperites will not be able to pay their rent. So we need an economic strategy.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Wesley for 5 minutes.
Boss, good day, everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank the first responders to the during that time of the fire, and they did a great job. So as Stony people, this is our under Jasper National Parks lies our traditional territory. This is where my ancestors have lived. And for a long time, during that time, history shows that there was never a forest fire that big because we, as Stony indigenous people, we steward the land. That was our job. Creator has given us a responsibility and a role to play in this ecosystem. And with the mountains being my home, my people have been doing that until 1907, when Jasper National Parks was created. So right after that, we were no longer able to maintain and steward the land because we were outlawed. So during that period of time, all these things that been escalated, there were overgrowth of forestry, and also we have other invasive species coming in. Before that, there was no evidence of invaders, and also the forestry was being maintained. Through our duties as Stony people, we have doing pipe ceremonies that helps maintain. That's the way of maintaining earth, and that's very important. So from what I've seen, the traditional science have not been recognized in the parks or right across Canada. But I'm not here to complain or anything. I just wanted to. I come here to help. See, as Stony people, I think traditional knowledge should be recognized and used as tool, so we don't have any more disasters. This is why I'm here. And also, as Yithka Stony people, we value kinship, and that's very important. Kinship is by sharing our knowledge to our visitors and also to our generation. That's very important. As we Stony people, we have a role and responsibility to live and also and also have a good life, because Jasper, the mountain, not just Jasper alone, the mountains is a designation for tourism, and we need to be heard because that's where we live. My ancestors have lived there, and today we still exist, and we need to be recognized. If we can help in a way, that would be good, as we have done a ceremony for the firefighters back in August. And I guess after the ceremony, within a week, the fire has rested, because everything that you see, you hear, and you feel is a living being. That's our beliefs. And if we work together with them through us, this beautiful landscape will continue to be beautiful. Thank you.
Last but not least, we'll go to Dr. Friedel, who's joining by video conference. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Kansai Tracy Friedel, Pito Witago Siswan Niao Esque Niao Mantok Hagen. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. In the Cree language, I've said my name is Tracy Friedel, and I'm a Nihiao Métis woman from the Métis people of Lac St. Anne, Alberta. I presently am the president of the representative governing body for the Lac St. Anne Métis. We are descendants of Cree Métis families who occupied the landscape of West Central Alberta since the late 1700s to the early 1800s, including in what today is known as Jasper National Park. The history of establishing national parks in Canada is complex and controversial, particularly as it concerns the displacement of Indigenous peoples, as was described by Barry. These protected areas are praised for their natural beauty and their commitment to conservation, but their creation inevitably came at the expense of Indigenous peoples, some of whom lived on these lands since time immemorial. In overseeing Jasper National Park, the federal government implemented policies that resulted in the forcible removal or displacement of Indigenous families and communities from these lands, disrupting traditional ways of life and connection to important places. Forcible removal without compensation and the barring of Indigenous peoples from practicing their cultural activities within the park's boundaries disrupted communities and livelihoods, and also adversely impacted their cultural practices. The legacies of this displacement are profound and enduring. In the case of Jasper National Park, since about 2005, there's been increasing recognition of those injustices that are facing the Indigenous peoples who were forcibly displaced. The Jasper Indigenous Forum brings park staff, managers, and representatives of Indigenous groups together with others to work towards returning Indigenous presence and culture to the landscape. Under this initiative, the park involves historically connected First Nation and Métis communities in park management matters, including recently in fire management initiatives, of which there has been an expanding effort to undertake prescribed burns. Unfortunately, though, there is a lot to catch up on regarding a century of fire suppression, the impacts of climate change, and wishing to meet the expectations of Jasper residents and Canadian and international visitors who desire a certain conception of nature. We know from our elders that fire was a way to promote ecological diversity and reduce the risk of wildfires. This type of cultural burning links to the idea of fire as medicine and was key to proper management of local ecosystems, something that Indigenous peoples were not given due credit for. With Indigenous peoples removed from the park, fire suppression became a priority. The Jasper wildfires demonstrate the compounding of mismanaged landscapes and climate change impacts and reveals the tensions that exist between a focus on recreation, tourism, and conservation on the one hand, and Indigenous reconciliation on the other hand. From here, it's important for parks to enhance its collaboration with Indigenous peoples, including a goal of reintroducing cultural burns as an aspect of park management. In addition to leading to enhanced biodiversity, which is important to other objectives such as caribou recovery, this activity can also be understood as an aspect of addressing the economic effects that forced displacement had on the removal of Indigenous peoples from these lands. In studying these factors, as this committee is doing, Lac-Saint Anne Métis calls on parks to commit to deepening that relationship building that is already underway by ensuring the management arrangements more closely align with Indigenous perspectives and aspirations regarding conservation. These efforts are crucial for advancing reconciliation. Kinanan Maskvanen, hi, thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start the questioning with Mr. Lloyd for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today. I want to thank you, Dr. Friedel, and Mr. Wesley, particularly for your testimony, and I agree. We need to integrate more traditional Indigenous knowledge at parks in forest management, and I think your comments today are much appreciated. But I will go into my questioning. I'll start with Mr. Mulligan here. You spoke about Parks Canada and the government having a flawed approach to forest management. Could you share a bit of what that flawed approach looks like?
Yes, thank you, MP Lloyd. I mean, I think that one of the major flaws in the approach is that it assumes that forest disturbance, industrial forest disturbance, is automatically negative, and that forests ought to be left kind of to their natural devices, even if they are very much at risk of fire. And I think that sadly we saw that's exactly what happened in Jasper, and that yes, forests which are in a completely natural state have many benefits, but when you have that type of forest around communities, it's inherently dangerous. And many folks, I think, have spoken about that risk for years on end, and unfortunately it was realized.
Had witnesses in the past and ministers of this government talk about ecological integrity being their #1 priority. Being experts in sustainability and forest management, is it a natural part of the ecology of forests that they be maintained as old growth forests and have fire suppressed for decades and decades?
Boreal forests, our forests are fire driven, and we know that. Fire is certainly a beneficial thing on the landscape, but when you have these large, naturally intense fires in forests that are simply left, it's quite dangerous. And so we think that sustainable harvesting and management is a much safer alternative to these large fires. It's not a panacea, it's one tool in the toolkit, but given the direness of the situation that we're facing, it's important not to exclude that tool.
Thank you. In 2017, when your organization wrote that article talking about the risk of the pine beetle and the risk of fire to Hinton and Jasper, you estimated that it would cost about $85 million to put in an action plan that would protect those communities and protect the park from this major fire. What would be the number that you would place on that if the government had done that, let's say, in the last 2 years? How much would that have cost?
You know what, that I'm not sure about from a number perspective. There was $75 million allocated to pine beetle mitigation funding. That money has been very successful in mitigating the spread of pine beetle in areas outside of the park, and that was part of the point of that article. Unfortunately, within the park, pine beetle has spread like crazy, and we've seen, the unfortunate consequences of that.
Pine beetle being allowed to spread largely unfettered in our national park has had a devastating impact on the areas around the park. Is that what you're saying?
It certainly had a devastating impact on forests within the park, and it's necessitated mitigative actions outside of the park to prevent it from spreading further. So companies have looked at the situation within the park and said, oh my goodness, that's what's coming at us. What pine stands immediately adjacent to the park are at risk of pine beetles spreading through, and so many of those stands have been harvested, and that strategy has been very successful at stopping the further east.
I haven't heard the argument made, but some people might accuse your organization of maybe having a financial motive for wanting to go into the parks. But I was speaking to some forestry experts in my riding, which is a major lumber producing area or processing area, that there really isn't a lot of value with after several years when these pine beetle infested trees are allowed to sit year after year, that it's mostly cut up and taken for wood chips and pellets and sold. Is there a major economic value for of the actual wood itself in the parks? Pine beetles?
The main value that our industry has in this conversation is the health of our forests throughout the province, because that's the right thing to do from an ecological standpoint, and that's the lifeblood of our industry.
We know from previous witnesses from other forest organizations that Parks Canada in the past has actually brought in forest companies to do some selective logging in the national park. And in those cases, Parks Canada was actually paid some money for those things. How much would it cost the taxpayer if this government had actually undertaken a proactive approach to selectively harvest the dead pine beetle infested trees and replant them with more fire-resistant trees around the town of Jasper to protect it from future risk?
So there was a small amount of harvesting done in Jasper, and there's also harvesting done in Banff National Park. And we think that there is real value in that from the standpoint of protecting our forests and maintaining health. It's very difficult to put a number on these things, but we know that forest management is a tool to promoting the health of our forests, and we think that it ought to be considered.
You know, we've talked a lot about like carbon emissions, and we know that reducing emissions is critically important, but when these forests are allowed to overgrow and they've been eaten out by these pine beetles, our famous Canadian carbon sinks, don't they become like net carbon emitters when they're left to, rot, and especially when these fires happen? What are the emissions that are created by leaving these forests unmanaged?
There's no question that the emissions when we have these types of catastrophic fires are huge. I mean, I read somewhere that the emissions from our 2023 fire season, which was a terrible fire season, were bigger than anything else, bigger than the rest of Canada combined.
Thank you.
Just from the
Okay, we'll
emissions
go to
of our
Mr.
forests.
Shafkat now for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all witnesses for being here today, and your interest and willingness to share your experience and knowledge to help us make recommendation on forest and forest fire policies. Mr. Wesley, in a recent article, John Desjarlais made some suggestions for unlocking the potential of indigenous-led and forest-based solutions to wildfire impacts. Could you tell us how greater indigenous involvement in fire management could help protect Jasper and surrounding communities?
Thank you for the question. As indigenous people, my earlier presentations, we believe everything is a living being. So is the fire. So in this case, my ancestors have done this before too, like they do prescribed burning. That's just for hunting purposes. And also, through our ceremonies, we have done a lot of that in the previous times, and if we can include that piece in the plan, I think that's going to work out as we can communicate with the fire itself too. So we believe he's a living being. So if we can, have a better understanding of what it can do, we already seen it physically, what it can do. But if you can communicate with it, you have a different perspective. And also there's a respect that goes with it. Yeah.
My next question is to Dr. Tracy. Dr. Tracy Fredel, could you provide more information about how your community and indigenous knowledge have and should be taken into consideration with regards to fire management?
Yes, thank you for the question. Just following along with what Barry had offered there, I think part of the issue we're seeing outside of the park in other jurisdictions with wildfires, which there have been a number of catastrophic fires in Alberta over the past century or past decade and more, the past 20 years really. I think, forestry practices also need to evolve somewhat, like planting monoculture, forests are not conducive to mitigating against wildfires either. So I think there's something to be further considered there. One of the issues in Jasper National Park, of course, is around the town site, there wasn't an appropriate fire guard put in place. And as I said, I think there's a number of competing interests at play in terms of the residents themselves, who obviously want to be safe, but also live in Jasper for a reason. They love, the nature that it provides. But visitors also, it's the idea of, creating large fire guards are quite unpopular with international and even Canadian visitors. I think I think it's possible, though, to remediate and restore and, create fire guards and have, more of a diverse species of trees planted in their place. So when there's remediation happening, and even in places where cultural burning is happening, you're going to see that biodiverse landscape return. And those landscapes, I think, are more conducive to mitigating against future wildfires. So a lot of those species as well, whether it's trees, shrubs, or forbs, they all also have cultural meaning to Indigenous peoples. So for, many, many years, there was no harvesting in the park, and a lot of, the species that are returned to the park in terms of traditional ecological knowledge species or native species actually can also contribute to a return to cultural harvesting in the park in a way that isn't possible now because, many of those species have been impacted as well. So I think it is possible, certainly, with cultural burns and a focus on TEK species for restoration and remediation, to really make some headway in terms of the park itself.
Thank you. How much time do you have?
30 seconds.
Oh, it's, I think I'll pass it on to 30 seconds. Thanks.
Monsieur Trudel, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais parler à vous.
Mr. Trudel, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Sweet, we're aware here of our Alberta colleagues are aware of what's happening in their vision. Now, what can you say about how the federal government might better manage climate change, including the fires in Jasper? I'd like to also ask you questions on the link between climate change and these fires. Now, there are natural disturbances that contribute to the health and renewal of our ecosystems, but there are so many disturbances. They are so numerous and intense and destructive. According to an organization on weather, the probabilities of extreme fires have doubled in the Canadian West. Scientists say that the increase in heat has led to erratic precipitation, less summer rain. According to Natural Resources Canada, the season begins earlier, lasts longer, and is harder to control. Science says that to ensure the safety of the public the government has to work defensively and proactively to defend people. And we have to deal with combustible fuel in helping to deal with climate change. Now, elected members from Alberta, as well as businesses, know about the effects of extreme weather conditions such as forest fires. Do you think decision makers in Alberta and from Alberta are aware of this link between climate change and weather?
The question, and I think it's an important question. It's a conversation we've been having in Alberta for quite a long time. As you know, we had Slave Lake Fire, we've had the Fort McMurray Fire, we've now had the Jasper Fire. So we have had substantial weather events, and we've also seen that in our agriculture industry, where we've had severe drought. that have impacted our agriculture producers. And so it is a real live conversation that climate change is real, that we are having severe climate events. And as a policymakers, we need to do better at how we're preparing and responding. Jasper specifically, we did need to prepare better in regards to ensuring that we had more wildland firefighters hired up, trained, and prepared for this year's season. We had asked for that for, I would say, at least 6 months prior to the season starting. Even when the season was ending, we were asking that we be ready for the next year's season. We need to create a joint training program between the federal government and the provincial governments to ensure that all wildland and structural firefighters are trained to the same level, that they're able to respond and that they're able to prepare. But we also need to be looking at our forest health and what is going on within our forested area. That would include looking at sustainable forestry practices and how do we look at the boreal forest, which we know is known to burn because that's how it rejuvenates itself. And so we have to look at forestry practices. We have to look at working government perspectives and levels of being able to ensure that we're doing things like building fire guards, that we are fire smarting homes, that we're ensuring that people are aware and able to have the financial means to fire smart, but we're also working with industry to help protect those areas.
Ce matin, en fait, aujourd'hui.
This morning or today in Ottawa, there was a department vehicle with two slogans on it. Scrap the cap or your family budget will suffer. And that's from the government of Alberta. Now, you're not in government, but you're from Alberta. What do you think of this publicity paid for by the taxes paid by Alberta citizens? What do you think of the Alberta government spending money to have this publicity in the streets of Ottawa, which is sort of against climate change?
Well, I would like to say it's just in Ottawa. We have the same advertisement happening in the province as well. I believe that we have a responsibility as policymakers to address the issues that Albertans care about. And right now we know that Albertans are concerned with inflation. They're also concerned with our productivity in the country and what that means for them being able to access jobs and being able to pay their mortgages and to put food on their tables. Talking about other issues, I think, deflects from the fact that Albertans are, as much as we are a wealthy province, struggling with being able to meet our basic needs. And so I would believe that all federal and provincial government should be focusing on what Canadians and Albertans need, which is finding a way to make sure we have good paying jobs, that we are driving our economy forward, that we're building export markets and we're building good economies so people have good sustainable jobs.
Thank you.
And
we'll have to stop there and go to Ms. McPherson for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here and sharing your expertise with us. I'd like to follow up with my colleague from Alberta, Heather Sweet, just to ask you a few questions. You know, you were just answering my colleague, Mr. Trudell's questions about what Albertans care about, and I would just put out there that I think probably Albertans care very little about chemtrails and Uber-style healthcare, but that is another thing that this provincial government seems to be obsessed with. Ms. Sweet, as the forestry critic, I'm curious as to your thoughts on, you know, in your testimony you talked about the economic strategy that we need to help those in Jasper recover. And so I am wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. You know, one of the things that we know is a reality is that there are so many members in Jasper who work in the tourism industry, as you indicated, and we know that for many of them they weren't eligible for EI. It's a very difficult thing because, of course, they would have had jobs and they would have been able to continue to make a living, but that opportunity was taken away from them by the fire. We've reached out to the government to have them change the EI rules. That we have not heard yet whether or not they would be willing to do that. We've not heard back from the minister on that issue. If you could talk about what an economic strategy would look like from your perspective, what more you would like to see the federal government do for the people of Jasper.
Well, thank you, Member, for the question. I think we have to look at Jasper as a very unique experience in the sense that their full economy is focused on tourism. We had CN in there as well, but CN is now leaving. So their whole economy is a tourist economy. In other jurisdictions where we've seen these fires, there's always been another economy, a supplementary economy. Fort McMurray, oil and gas, Slave Lake, we had forestry. Jasper does not. And so what we've heard from the people of Jasper is that they lost their biggest earning potential was during the time the fire was happening and then after the fire. And so because of that, it's almost similar to COVID, that all of a sudden they lost every potential that they had to generate any type of wealth to carry them through the off season. So what I would like to see is the province and the federal government have a conversation about what an economic recovery model would look like, similar to how we treated COVID. These businesses need to thrive. If they fail, it won't matter if we get tourists to go back to Jasper because there'll be no businesses that can operate. So we need to find a way to help them move through this gap and this period of time, make sure that they are able to have some kind of financial security so that they're viable over the next 18 months.
I know you also are very well informed with regards to the firefighting services that we have, and I know as the forestry critic, you've been paying a lot of attention to this. Could you talk a little bit about the conditions, the compensation, the benefits that the contracted wildfire fighters were given, and any concerns that you might have with regards to that?
Well, and I think it's the biggest struggle that we've had provincially is that we only contract our wildland firefighters 4 to 6 months. So the problem with that is that we have other jurisdictions that we're competing with across the country that do year-round firefighting, BC being a prime example. We also pay the least in the country. So if you look at Parks Canada versus Alberta, Parks Canada actually pays about $10 an hour higher in Alberta than the province does, which creates an issue around people moving through their career. Because you're competing with two different jurisdictions that pay very different salaries. The other piece of that is that because it's so short term, they don't receive benefits. They don't receive high wages. And the one thing I want to make sure that all members of the committee understand, it is a nonpartisan issue. Presumptive coverage for cancer needs to be covered by all firefighters, no matter if you're structural, industrial, or a wildland firefighter. Cancer coverage has to exist. We know these individuals are exposed to toxic environments that cause cancer. And so every single member of the committee, I would encourage you to please look at OH&S, presumptive coverage, and support our firefighters.
Thank you. That's an excellent point and something that I think that we should definitely have as one of the recommendations for this report. I just want to be clear. You said that the government of Alberta pays wildfire fighters the least in the country. Is that clear?
The wildland firefighters in Alberta are paid the least out of any other jurisdiction in the country.
Appalling. The other thing that you talked about in your testimony was how we need to rebuild to ensure that we are being fire smart, that we are making sure that we are not building in a way that puts us back in the same situation that we were in. Could you talk a little bit more about what you would like to see in terms of the rebuilding of buildings to ensure that they are fire smart?
Well, first off, I want to recognize that I know that there are insurance programs for homeowners or businesses that are going to rebuild. I think what people need to understand is that the insurance companies will only rebuild to the level of when the building burnt down. So whatever the building code is at that time. What I'm saying is if we're going to be smart and we're going to rebuild, we have to build fire smart. Jasper Park Lodge is a prime example. 50 years ago, there was a fire that went through that area and it caused serious damage to JPL, Jasper Park Lodge. They fire smarted their area, which is why JPL stands today, because they fire smarted. Every resident that wants to rebuild and live in Jasper should have the opportunity to fire smart, but the province and the federal government have to step up with the financial adjustment between what insurance will pay for and what it will cost them to fire smart. But we also need to make sure we change the building code so that every community and every building is fire smarted.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, on passe au deuxième tour.
Thank you. We'll go to our second round. We only have 15 minutes left, so we will have to cut the time to 3 minutes per MP. Mr. Delta, please go ahead. Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Mulligan. You mentioned earlier in your testimony that your association has made predictions about what happened this year. Now, how were you able to come to this conclusion and have such a relevant prediction? Now, how could we have dealt with what happened?
We made those predictions speaking with a number of experts in our industry, as well as folks who live in the community who were looking at the condition of the forest in Jasper, seeing effectively a hillside of red and dead trees and predicting that it was very likely to burn. So that's kind of how that prediction came about, and we're very sad that it was realized. Jasper's a place where folks in our industry go to recreate. Our association has had our annual general meeting there for the last 50 years, and we're just so sad to see what's happened there. But unfortunately, it was something that we could see coming.
Monsieur Mulligan, c'est évidemment très décevant.
Mr. Mulligan, it must have been very disappointing to see that for 6 or 7 years people could have acted and didn't. Mr. Chair, I'll share my time with Mr. Soroka.
Questions for MLA Sweet. Do you believe it's hypocritical for the federal NDP leader to question the energy sector about the fire in Jasper while he was in a coalition with the Liberal government that enabled the mismanagement of the fire in Jasper and they failed forest fire management policies?
Well, thank you, member, for the question. What I will say is that the people of Jasper are focused on rebuilding their community. They're focused on getting a strong economy. They're focused on housing, and they're focused on getting Jasper ready for tourism. I don't think turning this into a partisan conversation is helpful for the people of Alberta and for the people of Jasper.
Okay, but it's very well for the NDP leader to turn it partisan. That's fine. My next question then will be for Brock Mulligan. You know, with your organization, you've talked about how the fire was eventually going to happen if it wasn't proper mitigation. What are some of the issues that you could have dealt with or your organization could have dealt with to make sure that the fire in Jasper did not burn the town?
Well, I think that we advocated for a more comprehensive forest management strategy within the park that would have looked at a variety of different tools, prescriptive burning, incorporation of knowledge from Indigenous communities, perhaps more harvesting, and so those were the kind of things that we looked at. And I think that the second point is that we see other areas in Alberta, particularly within some of those caribou zones, where we now have these older forests that are posing similar risks to what we saw in Jasper, and some action needs to be taken to address those, or we're going to relive this scenario over and again.
Merci. Madame Taylor-Roy.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I wanted to start with one question for Ms. Sweet. You mentioned that, and I think my colleague, Ms. McPherson, spoke of the low pay for firefighters, wildland firefighters in Alberta. Why do you think Alberta, which has such high risks for forest fires, has the lowest paid firefighters and with less benefits and less training? I find it perplexing, and I'm just wondering if you have any theories as to why they are underpaid and it seems to me a little bit undervalued without having any coverage for cancer either.
Well, I think it's a culture shift that needs to happen in the province. Right now, a lot of the individuals that have been hired are part-time students and they're summer students, and so the position of wildland firefighter has been treated as such. They hire at a university, they hire them for the summer, and then they go back to university. And so the government treats it as that, as like almost a summer job for students, and it's not a summer job for students. It is a very serious profession that requires a lot of serious training, and we need supports, and we need to ensure that that's happening. And so for us to respect the profession, we need to pay better. We need to be doing year-round training, and I've been calling for a year-round wildfire fighting firefighting force, no different than what BC has, because our ecosystems are very similar between BC and Alberta, and we should be treating them exactly the same way.
Thank you. And I noticed that the firefighting budget in Alberta had gone down consistently until 2023, when you had those series of fires, and it was increased. And now it is probably still, when you're looking at real dollars, less than it was back in 2018. But I'm wondering, does that play any into this kind of summer job perspective on firefighters, rather than seeing it as a profession which should be year-round and have benefits? Do you think it's driven by financial considerations, I guess is my question.
Well, I would believe that the budget for sure is part of the discussion, as I believe it would be for every government. But I think it is just a lack of understanding or a lack of willingness to really shift the culture around the profession. And to be fair, I mean, these climate events that we are having are becoming more and more frequent. So it is definitely, it needs to be a policy shift. It needs to be a financial shift. It needs to be a commitment from the government, and it needs to be year-round wildland firefighting with good training and support, including presumptive coverage for firefighters.
Much, and I'd like to turn to Mr. Wesley.
Sorry, Ms. Taylor-Roy, we're having a 3-minute round. Yeah. Well, I had to reduce it so that we can finish on time. Sorry about that. Monsieur Trudel, vous disposez d'une minute et demie. Vous avez le temps.
Mr. Trudel, you have a minute and a half. I'd like to talk to Ms. Sweet about this truck with scrap the tax, or scrap the cap. Now, what about this regulation having to do with putting a ceiling on emissions? Now, this regulation hasn't been implemented. It doesn't exist yet. And contrary to what was said, the Prime Minister said at the United Nations, we are trying to reduce carbon emissions and to put, not reduce, they're putting a ceiling on these emissions. But the Minister of the Environment hasn't implemented them, so very disappointed in this. And it seems that the government of Alberta is engaged in a fear-mongering campaign with respect to climate change. What do you think?
Well, thank you, member. I mean, what I can say is when we were in government, we created a climate leadership plan that was specifically worked with industry on reducing their emissions. The oil and gas industry in Alberta, our forestry companies, all of our resource sector are very aware of how they can reduce their emissions, and they are working towards those goals. When we were in government, we worked in collaboration and supporting industry in doing that, and they were happy to do it. If the provincial government wants to continue to fight with the feds and not engage in what is actually good economic policy and what actually supports environmental directives, that is the prerogative of our premier. Okay. But what I would say is that we believe in climate change, and we believe we need to do our best to ensure that industry is successful.
Merci. On va passer à Mme McPherson. 1 minute et demie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Sweet, you just talked about the different levels of government having to work well together. I think this is something that a lot of Albertans were really concerned about during the wildfires, that there was a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blaming happening, and not a lot of focus on getting the help to the people of Jasper and ensuring that the right things were happening. Right now, you just responded to my colleague talking a little bit about getting in fights with the federal government, and it is one of the favorite pastimes that we've seen from some provincial leaders. I wonder if you could just spend the next few seconds really talking about how you saw the way that the federal government and the provincial government worked together on this particular crisis.
Well, what I will say is, from the experience that I have heard from people within Jasper, is that they understand that it was an event that had a lot of decision points that were happening within it, but in fact, they recognize that the work that was done to save the town site was the best that could happen. I mean, it's a high-risk situation. There's a lot of decision-making happening in that moment. I think I've heard from people living in Jasper now, they're disappointed to now hear that there's criticisms being made about not allowing first responders to come in and be able to save the town site and to do different things like that. That is not the case. And I will say, we need to be respectful to to our individuals, our first responders that were working both with Parks Canada and both with the province. They were doing the best they could do in the situation that they were in, and many of them were trapped.
Thank you. Mr. Soroka, for 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question will go to Ms. Friedel. You had mentioned that there wasn't a proper fire guard put around Jasper, the town site itself. Through traditional knowledge and use, what would you have done or your organization have recommended to have done to protect the town of Jasper?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Soroka, for the question. I think what Indigenous peoples as part of the forum recognized that the prescribed burning wasn't happening quickly enough. As I said, I think it's, there's tensions between actually doing what needs to be done and, disappointing visitors to the park. So I think, even today, if you look at the west side of Jasper, which didn't burn, I mean, that is still a high-risk situation there, and something will need to be done. I did want to take the chance, if I could as well, to, in terms of the legislation that was passed to designate the municipality as, in terms of the land use, there was no consultation on that legislation either with Indigenous peoples, which was somewhat disappointing. I do think the opportunity to rebuild is an opportunity to fulfill those commitments that have been made to reconciliation in terms of economic reconciliation, opportunities for development of businesses around Indigenous interpretation. Tourism is a very big, as we've heard, opportunity and mainstay in the park, and so hopefully there will be more of that. But yeah, I think the fire guard situation, I think from my experience on the forum, I think most of the communities recognized that more needed to be done, and so hopefully going forward that will be the case.
So then, Ms. Friedel, are you basically saying that the government basically gives lip service to proper Indigenous consultation as opposed to actually following through and doing a proper job then?
Well, I think what I would say, Mr. Soroka, is that, the Jasper wildfire has been devastating. It's tragic. It has great impacts and so forth, but I also see it as an opportunity to fulfill commitments, as I said, that have already been made to reconciliation. So I think that's what we're all hoping to see.
Okay, yeah, that's some of the things that we definitely need to look forward to is how can we rebuild. I'll go back to Mr. Mulligan. You had, one of the things that Ms. Friedel just brought up, the west side of Jasper potentially still can burn. What kind of options do we have to do proper forest management there to make sure that Jasper does not see another forest fire coming from the northwest?
Yeah, so I think all the stakeholders need to be brought together immediately, and it's good that we're having these types of conversations, to have a conversation about how we can develop a very progressive forest management plan and look at all the tools in the toolbox to manage it, because if we assume that just leaving things as they are is going to be a viable approach going forward, I think that we risk, reliving exactly what we've seen.
Thank you. Mr. Van Couverden.
How much time do we have?
3 minutes.
Okay. My question will be for MLA Sweet, if that's okay. You mentioned the problematic rate of pay and the seasonality of the workforce with respect to wildland firefighters in Alberta. I was curious how that impacts the retention of Alberta wildland firefighters with a rather austere approach, and if retraining is required every season after season, if that's the case.
Yeah, thank you, member, and that's a great question. So our retention's quite low, and we actually increased one fire crew this year, which had almost all brand new staff on it. Most people, like I said, for obvious reasons, go to other jurisdictions, whether they go to Parks Canada or whether they go to BC, because they're not compensated to be here. And unless you're going back to school, you need a year-round employment opportunity. So retention is very low, and yes, we have to do retraining every year.
Okay, thank you for your insight. I think we all agree that paying first responders appropriately and ensuring that they don't need to be new people every year is really, really important. Mr. Mulligan, I have a question, and I thank you for your work and for the contributions that you make to the economy. Obviously, forestry, wood products, and lumber are very, very important for various reasons. In 2017, we've heard not just from your organization but others that said, "Hey, look, in no certain terms, the fire likelihood is higher than it has been in the past. The pine beetle has definitely had a significant and deleterious impact on the life of the forest, and fires are more likely. Following that, our government invested heavily in clearing, in a sprinkler system, in incremental amounts of burns. Are you aware of those additional investments and what the investments were like prior? I know this is like, you're not a government official and, you work in the sector, but are you aware of the response that the government made during those times?
Not well aware of the response to fire mitigation within the park. I'm more aware of the investments that were made in pine beetle mitigation. It was $75 million that was put into that. It built on work that was already undergoing in Alberta, and I think, frankly, it worked quite well. In terms of the actual protection of the town with some of the other measures that you mentioned, I'm not as up to speed on those.
Oh, thank you very much. I've been poring over the numbers too, and in hindsight, when you look at a disaster, the response can always be, well, we should have done more. There's no question, that more could always be done. But I'll also say that the amounts invested in removal, in the preventative fire burning, and in the sprinkler system were unprecedented for the area. But I thank you for bringing it to the attention of the Minister of the day, and I can reassure you that actions were taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the witnesses, both here and online, for contributing to this very important discussion. We're going to take a short break and go on to the second panel. But thank you again. Thank you for being here and being online. Members, we're about to start the second panel. We have with us for this second panel Mr. Jim Iglinski, retired Member of Parliament. Mr. Iglinski, welcome back to the House of Commons. And then we have Dane D'Souza, Senior Policy Advisor, both in emergency management. Both Mr. Iglinski and Mr. D'Souza are appearing as individuals. And from the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, we have Amy Cardinal Christensen, Policy Analyst, and from the Outdoor Council of Canada, we have Lindsay Gardner, Project Director. We'll start with you, Mr. Iglinski. I think you know how it works, so you've got 5 minutes.
Chair, good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you about Jasper National Park fire this last summer. I never thought I would be sitting as a speaker on a committee. I'm more comfortable on your side asking questions. But what took place this summer in Jasper Park and the town site needs to be studied and examined. And I want to thank the committee for conducting this study. As the past sitting member of Parliament for Yellowhead riding, I spoke numerous times in the House of Commons regarding the pine beetle situation in Jasper Park and the Yellowhead region. I spoke in May of 2016 in the House of Commons asking the Liberals for their plan to combat the pine beetle infestation in Jasper National Park. I told them at that time nothing was being done. I again brought up the issue in June of 2017 to then Environmental Minister Catherine McKenna. I explained my concerns about the tremendous fuel load of dead trees that were the results of the pine beetle. I stressed that the residents were concerned for the safety of the visitors and for their own homes. I told the Liberals that there was a high risk of a devastating fire in Jasper if they did not act. In October of 2017, during question period, I asked the Liberals what they were going to do to assist the forestry industry in my region due to the pine beetle infestation. I received no reassurance. On October 26, 2017, I spoke of the pine beetle and my experience with it in BC. I tried to explain in detail the movement of the pine beetle and that Jasper had turned brown from one end to the other. I told the Liberals that the people of Jasper at this time, just a few months later, were now fearing for the safety of themselves and their community because of the dead pine trees, and that there was a risk of a fire that, if started, people would not be able to escape. I asked the Liberals for an adaptation plan for the pine beetle, but never received one, and never witnessed adequate action being taken by the government inside the park. On November 9th of 2017, I arose again in the House to ask the government's plan for the pine beetle infestation. I advised that the infestation had increased tenfold in the last year, that it had moved from Jasper into central Alberta, and I asked directly what the Liberals were doing to stop this infestation. I once again received no answer. My point is that since raising these concerns, I continued to visit Jasper National Park and did not see adequate responses. The Liberal government knew that the fire in Jasper was inevitable. We all did. But they failed to take this seriously to prevent the devastation of the Jasper wildfire. By July 1924, there was so much dead wood laying around that Jasper was a tinderbox. Those of us who live in this area knew there would be a major destructive fire. We just didn't know when, but we do now. Jasper National Park and the town of Jasper was almost totally destroyed by the fire. Thankfully, not all was lost. The impact to the residents of Jasper, business owners, tourism losses will be felt for years to come. I hope your study of this tragedy will make our park safer and protect the environmental beauty of the landscape and communities within them. In closing my address, I want the committee to know that 2 weeks ago, I drove towards Jasper Park, starting from Lake Louise in the south. And I was shocked to see the degree of burn in the park leading up to the Jasper town site. It had to be a horrendously hot fire. The destruction in the community was devastating. It's hard to put it into words. I feel deeply for the people of Jasper. It's going to be a tough road ahead for them. And for the last 50 years, I have loved to travel through our beautiful Jasper Park, to enjoy the mountains, the wildlife, and the incredible scenery. Never in any of those trips, and there was hundreds, was I not lucky enough to see abundant wildlife. Ladies and gentlemen, and I want to stress this, on this last trip through Jasper National Park, I did not see one animal.
Mr.
What
Glinsky,
went wrong? People of Jasper deserve answers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. D'Souza for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Dane D'Souza. I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation of Alberta. My Métis family names are Sutherland and Sinclair from the Selkirk area of the Red River Valley. I'm a wildland firefighter. I worked 6 years as a Helitack wildfire fighter out of the Rocky Mountain House District in Alberta. I'm a wildfire researcher and expert on Indigenous fire stewardship, and I thank you for this opportunity to address you tonight. I'm going to get right to it. The cause of Jasper, Lytton, Fort McMurray, Slave Lake is not climate change. The intensity and prevalence of fires like these are exacerbated by climate change. However, their cause is directly tied to the colonial suppression of Indigenous fire stewardship and fire on the land in general. To illustrate Indigenous fire stewardship in what is currently Canada is a landscape-based science developed over more than 20,000 years to manage the landscape-based phenomenon of wildfires. 14,000 years ago, the Laurentide Glacier spread from the Rocky Mountains to the Hudson Bay. And as it receded, inch by inch, my ancestors were there applying fire to the land. We can track human migration across the planet by tracking the impacts we have had on the natural environment, like the extinction of megafauna. Applying fire to the land has been and is a key component of how we as human beings have influenced our natural environment. As species of trees have grown to repopulate the landscapes formed by glacial recession, my ancestors were there every single inch of the way, applying fire to the landscape to engineer the ecological conditions necessary to sustain themselves. Within the genetics of every blade of grass, every tree, and every animal on this continent is the memory of these fires. There are countless reasons for which the land would be burned, ranging from influencing the migration of animals to reinvigorating the growth of plants to provide medicines and sustenance, to influencing the makeup of the landscape to provide materials and mobility throughout the forest. In my research, I have interviewed the last of the traditional fire stewards left in the wake of Canada's cultural genocide. And each of them speaks of a turning point in the 1980s in which Canada could effectively enforce the suppression of Indigenous fire stewardship, which was passed into law in the 1900s. If you're to look at the graphs of fire intensity, frequency, and prevalence in the boreal forest, they all follow a similar pattern. In the 1990s, there's a steady increase. In the 2000s, it steepens, and now it's virtually vertical in comparison. This is not a coincidence. Indigenous fire has set the rhythm of forest cycles throughout the boreal, having created landscapes that can tolerate fire and increase resilience. By removing Indigenous fire from the land, we have created the conditions that result in the exact scenarios we're here to discuss today. I've had the pleasure of working with the Mountain Legacy Project, who are comparing photos of modern-day national parks like Banff and Jasper with glass slides taken over 100 years ago. There's a striking difference between these landscapes, the composition of the forest. 100 years ago, Jasper was speckled with small fields, prairies, glens, and forests at different stages of their growth cycle, a landscape mosaic. More recently, these forests are dense, conifer-rich oceans of trees. Now picture the boreal forest as an ocean, and fire as a wave that passes through that ocean and gains force and energy until it becomes a force that is absolutely unstoppable. There's no house, there's no infrastructure, and there's no response that can withstand this amount of energy that is beyond that of an atomic bomb. Now picture that exact same ocean. And over here is an island that was burnt 5 years ago to reinvigorate traditional medicines. And then over here is an archipelago of underbrush that was cleared 6 years ago to create mobility through portages. And over here, a nice little island for ungulates that was burnt 5 years ago. As that wave comes through that ocean of trees, it crashes upon the shores of those pockets and loses its energy, so by the time it reaches communities, it can be dealt with. The solution at hand is at the intersection of climate action and truth and reconciliation. By employing wildfire practitioners year-round to carry out landscape-level burns with decentralized decision-making, we can return good fire to the land. These benefits are not only that we can prevent another conversation like this and save lives, but we can increase biodiversity, optimize carbon cycling and ecological health and resilience in the face of climate change. Last year, wildfires in Canada put more carbon into the atmosphere than the entire global airline industry. These wildfires are unnatural, and their impacts on the ability of the forest to sequester and store carbon has detriments that threaten the existence of humanity. By following models similar to those championed by the Banff Wildfire Management Program, we can action these solutions. This model requires that wildfire management is carried out by landscape-level decision makers and practitioners that are highly experienced and committed to fire stewardship in collaboration with local communities and Indigenous knowledge keepers. To be quite frank, I find it sickening that we're here talking about Jasper, not Lytton, not Paddle Prairie. We're admonishing those who responded to these fires while gutting wildfire programs every year and bleeding vital years of experience. We're not here talking about the wildland firefighters who lost their lives in the past years. Here's your solution. Invest in Indigenous fire stewardship, work with communities at a landscape level to put good fire on the land to meet needs beyond resiliency, and honor the lives of those firefighters who have lost their lives by treating this as an occupation as opposed to a cost variable on a forestry budget that is to be slashed for political gain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. D'Souza. We'll go now to Amy Cardinal Christensen for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Amy Cardinal Christensen. I live in Treaty 6, Rocky Mountain House, Alberta. I'm a member of the Métis Nation from the Cardinal and Mabacan families of Treaty 6 and Treaty 8. My family's band PACs was disenfranchised by the Canadian government. My family used to travel and trade through Jasper, but I do not have Indigenous rights or territory in the area and fully support the Indigenous rights holders there. I come to this testimony from a national perspective through my past role as a research scientist with the Canadian Forest Service for 15 years, my 2 years spent as an Indigenous fire specialist with Parks Canada, and my current role with Indigenous Leadership Initiative. I first want to send my thoughts of compassion and solidarity to my colleagues with Parks Canada, who not only had to endure the fire event that happened there and the recovery they are currently undertaking, but also hearings like this, where people take incredibly complex situations that are generations in the making and try to finger point. I know how hard you were all working leading up to the fire. I know what you endured during the fires, and I fully support you moving forward. As the previous Indigenous witnesses stated, the fire problem in Jasper National Park started in 1907 when the national park was established and Indigenous people were forcibly removed. These people had distinct kinship ties to the cultural landscapes there, including fire stewardship practices, like frequently burning valley bottoms to achieve diversity on the landscape in coordination with our important teacher, Lightning. Now, when people travel to national parks like Jasper, they observe a carpet of dark green trees as far as the eye can see and think it is beautiful and natural. It is not. It is an unhealthy landscape that is suffering. It is not adaptive to human-caused climate change, which is further increasing the fire problem. Our elders refer to this as a hungry forest because you have to go so far to encounter any forms of diversity. These homogeneous forests, where the trees are all around the same age and same species type, become prone to disturbances like insects and also out of control fires, like many witnesses have stated. But I want to make it clear that fire is not a disturbance on the landscape, although we treat it as such. Rather, it has been the removal of fire from fire-dependent forests in Canada that has been the larger disturbance and has caused what we're seeing today. When I woke up the day after Jasper burned, I had multiple messages from Indigenous people who are rights holders in that area, saying this would never have happened if they had been allowed to continue their relationship with fire in the lands and valleys of Jasper. I also want to point out what happened in Jasper is not unique. Indigenous communities all across Canada are repeatedly disproportionately impacted by wildfire. In the last 2 years, 149 Indigenous communities have experienced wildfire evacuations. I'll repeat that. 149 Indigenous communities evacuated from wildfire in the last 2 years. Yet Indigenous nations and people are continually excluded from decision-making around fire management. Wildfire evacuations are expensive. We estimated that in the last 42 years, the wildfire evacuations have cost the Canadian economy $4.6 billion. This doesn't even include the cost of fighting the fires, just of moving people. We've spent hundreds of millions over the years in Canada on bringing in international firefighters who don't know our landscape. We're spending hundreds of millions on firefighting planes that need to be upgraded or replaced. People are starting to push a federal firefighting force, but more bureaucracy with people further removed from local knowledge is not the answer. We already have a movement that could function as a nationwide firefighting force in Canada that's just waiting to be activated, Indigenous Guardians. More than 200 First Nations year-round Guardian programs already help manage lands and waters across the country. Some are helping respond to fires. When fire threatened Fort Good Hope, Northwest Territory this June, the Guardians were prepared. They helped evacuate community members, and thanks to training from Yukon First Nation wildfires, they joined the fire line and helped save the town. By expanding existing Guardian programs and investing in new Fire Guardian programs, we can create a fleet of locally knowledgeable professionals ready to respond to fire and reduce risk. Indigenous Fire Guardians will work year-round on fire. They will be able to put fire on the land in spring and fall, a technique proven to reduce fire risk during hot, dry summers. They will work on emergency management, planning, education, preparedness, fire prevention, on response and on recovery after fires happen. Vegetation also grows back. They will be there to make sure fire mitigation work is maintained. They will work to build healthy landscapes, which also will protect our vital watersheds. Not only does this increase the ability to navigate this new area of fire, but it also creates jobs. Engaging more Guardians in fighting wildfire is an investment that pays off. I just returned from Australia, where their Indigenous fire rangers are making huge positive impacts. It will enable Indigenous nations in Canada to meet the challenge of supercharged fire with greater capacity and Indigenous and local knowledge. We will always have fire, but we can change our relationship to it, and Indigenous leadership is the future of fire.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cardinal Christensen. We'll go now to Lindsay Gardner for 5 minutes.
Hello, I would just like to start by thanking Amy and Dane for the immense knowledge that you brought here today, and that I stand in solidarity with your messages. Hello, everyone. I am Lindsay. I am a Jasper community member, calling Jasper home for close to 7 years. And I wish that I could be with you today in person so that we could look each other in the eyes and you could see in me the future. Because I am the future, like your children and like your grandchildren. And so far in this committee, various politicians have said, what will we do to protect other communities? How will we protect Canadians? And I am here today to tell you one way that we can protect our future. And the first step is putting aside the divisive politics and working together. As our community grapples with the aftermath of this fire, there is a troubling narrative, one that points fingers at individuals, political leaders, and governmental agencies. First and foremost, these divisive politics are harmful to Jasperites. As a resident myself and someone with deep connections to those who actively fought the fire and who are working tirelessly on recovery efforts now, my message is that Jasper needs support, not division. Please put the politics aside and allow Jasperites to recover. Listen to the on-the-ground expertise. Support those that are on the ground, as that is the role of good leadership. Secondly, beneath these surface-level discussions lies a much larger, more insidious truth. The wildfire that swept through our community is not an isolated event. It is the consequence of climate change, and it is the consequence of colonial land use practices and a global system built on extraction and corporate gain at the cost of a livable planet. The same competitive and cutthroat attitude in which we have treated the earth is present in our parliament today. Why are we amplifying a culture of division, destruction, and competition? We desperately need collaboration. The conversation around this fire has been misdirected. It has been convenient to focus on surface-level debates, like which party didn't allocate enough resources or what management plan could have been different. But the root issue is not about one individual's mistake or a single policy misstep. Climate change is the outcome of a system that prioritizes short-term economic profit over long-term human and ecological health. Wildfires, floods, and droughts are all symptoms of a system that no longer serves life, but only serves profit. So my question is not what does one governmental agency or one party do in a nearsighted time frame. My question is what are we going to do to ensure there is a future for young people? We don't want to live on a burning planet, but we are. And I do not want to see my leadership point fingers and perpetuate divisive and polarizing arguments when I need you to work together to find solutions to climate change. And so, here is my single recommendation. I implore you to acknowledge the severity of the climate crisis and take an active role in being leaders to drive us to solutions. I believe you can do this. There is an overwhelming consensus through the largest peer-reviewed scientific process, the IPCC, that outlines why we must meet our international targets to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Please listen to the science. And to every person in Parliament, every political leader, and every Canadian, Canada can be the leader of a system that prioritizes human well-being. We have the resources, the land, the culture, and the people. And considering climate change, we can adapt and show the world what an abundant system looks like. This is an exciting moment. I believe it is an inflection point in history, but business as usual will not work. You have an opportunity to be a leader of this change and protect other communities like Jasper. But that will require collaboration, and it will require a dedication to choose people's well-being over division. And that needs to start right here in our Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gardner. We'll go now to the rounds of questions. Mr. Mazier, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the witnesses today and some great testimony here. Mr. Iglinski, since the Jasper wildfire investigation began, we've learned that Parks Canada officials were discussing cancelling prescribed burns. A senior official at Parks Canada wrote in an email months before the Jasper wildfires, and I quote, "At what point do we make the organizational decision to cancel prescribed burns in Western Canada?" Did Parks Canada complete all the prescribed burns in Jasper that they said they would?
To my knowledge, no. We had many discussions with staff from the parks. They would tell us that they were going to do a burn in the fall, going to do a burn in the springs, and those never happened. In our pine beetle task force that we had set up with the Parks Canada, the industry of the area, with the town of Hinton, town of Edson, Yellowhead County, there was always going to do, but nothing happened.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Glinski again. I've obtained some very damning allegation from you. In 2016, you stated, and I quote, "Government employees have been told they cannot talk to the local officials about the mountain pine beetle issue." You then stated the Liberal government was muzzling scientists at Parks Canada. Are you aware of any Parks Canada employees who have been reprimanded or placed under a gag order for voicing their concern with this Liberal government's mismanagement of Jasper National Park?
Yes, I am aware of one individual, one of the scientists working in the park, being terminated for comments that he made against management or management levels. I did not speak to that gentleman personally. He did not want to speak to me, but messages were relayed by fellow workers of his to me to take some action. And so I thought it was deemed necessary to bring it up in the House.
He was terminated?
My understanding, he was terminated.
Oh, wow. Do you believe that people are afraid to speak out against Parks Canada because they may be punished?
That has always been a It's always been a problem. And I won't even say it's Parks Canada. I was a RCMP officer for 35 years, working in a federal government environment. You don't speak out against management, even though you may disagree. And that was there in the parks. I had a good working relationship with the wardens and the people working in the park, as I did with our federal jail in our area. I think they trusted me because of my background, but there was discontention. There was two sides to the park, ecological side and a practical side, and there was controversies within the organization. People were afraid to talk, and I did have conversations, but those were private conversations, and I have to protect individuals.
Thank you. Minister Guilbeault, this is again for you, Mr. Iglesias. Mr. Guilbeault and his Parks Canada officials told the Jasper wildfire investigation that everything that could have been done to protect Jasper was done. Is this statement true?
I do not believe so. There was a lot more that could have been done. Part of it came out in evidence today, like proper culling of trees around the community, further fire barriers, I think a heavier aspect on sprinkling in the area. Let's face it, if you look at the news releases that came out, the fire started on July 22nd. Firefighting resources are now in place on the 27th. I've always found that Parks Canada is more reactive when it comes to their firefighting versus the forestry sector of Alberta. Forestry sector, if it's an extreme weather area, they'll bring the resources in. They'll pay the resources to sit there and stand by. So when that fire starts or that lightning strike, those people are there now. And that is the difference between the two different forms of government. So I do not believe that they did an adequate job.
Must be pretty frustrating. Like, you've been working at this when you were a sitting MP and trying to get the attention of this government to do something, to act. You observed that they weren't doing prescribed burns. We had people on the landscape. We've had several testimonies. We had foresters, we had Indigenous knowledge, all sitting on the landscape. That must have, I don't know, it made my blood boil when things like that happen on my landscape. So I can't imagine what you went through. And is there?
You're absolutely correct. I was passing the message on of the residents of Jasper, the employees of Jasper Park, the industry in my area, the communities of Hinton. Hinton was as terrified as Jasper was because they're just up the road. And Edson, where I live, is just a little further down the road. We're all for it. So everybody was afraid. We all saw that tinderbox there. We all saw the dead pine trees. We knew something was going to happen, as I mentioned earlier. The people there were concerned. I had to bring it forward. That was my job, to bring their concerns forward. And I believe I did that job.
Thank you. Do you believe the Liberal government was negligent in protecting Jasper?
I believe Parks Canada could have done more, and we can't control who starts the fire. We know 99% of the time it's lightning, and it happens. Could more have been done? I believe more could have been done.
Okay, we'll go to Mr. Van Couverden now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, despite calls from witnesses, despite calls from people who have emailed all of us, because I think we've all received these emails, to turn down the political, rhetoric on this issue, it's really disappointing to see that this is continuing at this level. And unfortunately, I feel as though I need to ask Mr. Iglinski if he'd care to correct the record, because back in your time as a member of Parliament, and perhaps just prior to it, Stephen Harper's deficit reduction action plan took $30 million out of Parks Canada, which affected over 1,600 employees. And the result of those conservative cuts were that in 2010, 2011, 2013, 2012, 2013, and 2014, there was no mechanical thinning conducting in Jasper National Park, and there was no prescribed burns. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware of that, but I would like to clarify one thing that you said.
Okay, I've got other questions, sir. So the result of those conservative cuts were that there was no forest management in Jasper during that time. And then this government got elected in 2015, and then a couple months later in 2016, you urged the government in 2016, as you said, to develop a strategy for mountain pine beetle. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware of the fact that in 2016 a forest management strategy for mountain pine beetle was developed and implemented?
I believe one was started, yes.
Yeah. So when you said that nothing happened after your calls for action 4 months into the tenure of this government, if you'd not. Okay. So you agree that in 2016 a forest management strategy for mountain pine beetle was developed in 2016, around the same time as you were calling for it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Did you also know that in 2016 our government provided over $42 million to Parks Canada in new funding, and that since then our government has invested over $800 million in initiatives related to improving wildfire management?
I weren't aware of those numbers, sir.
These are all incremental investments because of the Harper years of the Deficit Reduction Action Plan absolutely gutting these environmental measures. That's all I have to talk about that, and I appreciate your willingness to clarify the record. Ms. Cardinal, I'm really glad you could be here with us virtually. I'm a huge fan of the Guardians and the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. I should declare that I'm friends with Valerie Courtois. We've been up north together, and I just went over to the Lands Need Guardians website, and I'm not trying to brag, but there's a picture of us together in front of that great big house that was erected on Parliament Hill a couple of years ago, and it was a really, really moving event for me. So I thought I'd ask you, given that our government has been really, really proud to collaborate with the Guardians and the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. I know that our government has an Indigenous Fire Stewardship program with Parks Canada. How can we continue to move this forward? How can we continue to maximize all of the cultural knowledge and wisdom that First Nations and other Indigenous peoples have in Canada to prevent these types of disasters, or I should say?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think, one thing that we see because of colonization, and Dane kind of mentioned it, is that there's been a massive, not loss of Indigenous knowledge, because we didn't drop it, it was ripped from us. But, we really need to accelerate capacity in our communities again, especially around fire. So that's one thing, that we'd really like to see is more investment in that area, actual action on the ground in terms of training Indigenous people in fire. And so I think another issue that we're seeing is really the long-term sustained funding. So, we have had investment in Guardian programs, which has been great, but, it's 3 to 5 year funding. Communities continually have to reapply. And so that's one thing that's been an issue in trying to get these things instated. Whereas when we look at our colleagues in Australia, lots of them have much more longer-term funding bases that they can draw from to keep their programs running.
Thanks. That's a really good recommendation. I think something that we can bring to Parks Canada as a recommendation. I know that there's a lot of Indigenous employees and workers with Parks Canada, but I also would like to see that the Guardians Initiative and the Indigenous Leadership Initiative has got more than just a seat at the table, but a more long-term goal. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Ms. Gardner, I've got an article here from the Jasper Local, and first, I admire your work with Protect Our Winters, and I thank you for your climate advocacy or climate action advocacy. The article from the Jasper Local was so closely tied to what you were recommending with respect to the misinformation, the toxic politics that have entered into this committee meeting. Have you read the article in question from the Jasper Local? Do you have any insight, perspective from it? Would you like to add to it at all?
Sure. I think that what it really points to is that the people that know community best are locals, right? And those are the people that are going to drive forward changes and recovery, and empowering them and giving them the spotlight is the most important thing. And other narratives take away power and change-making capacity from local communities. So to reinforce really what Amy and Dana both said, a lot of these solutions lie in empowering our local communities, our Indigenous knowledge holders, and centralizing their ability to understand a relationship to a landscape and being the leaders in that.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Just one final question. As a Jasperite, Would you like us to continue these meetings and continue to have these partisan conversations about what happened to Jasper? Would you like us to wrap it up?
Very briefly, please.
I would like you to wrap it up.
Je remercie tous les témoins qui sont...
I'd like to thank witnesses for appearing today. You're talking about very important issues. Sir, when we hear about what happened at Jasper, what we really need to talk about is cooperation among governments, provincial, federal, and also Indigenous peoples. In Quebec, we have 11 Indigenous nations, as you probably know. Several of them have been affected by forest fires, so we have worked with them. I think everyone can learn from each other. What do you think was well done with respect to preventing forest fires, and what was not done, and what was an absolute lack, really seriously, what did not happen which really should have happened, and what could they have done to prevent what happened in Jasper?
Excuse me. I think what could have been done isn't really in the context of the time frame that's being discussed here. What can be done is what I've mentioned, is investing in those ground level, long-term sustained roles in wildfire management that take into account local realities, that decentralize decision making, and that incorporate Indigenous knowledge of the landscape and the factors that affect wildfires and how they behave on the landscape. It's really about relationship building. It's about truth and reconciliation, and it's about understanding that right now these conversations live and die at liability. That's where the buck really stops when it comes to prevention, is so many Indigenous fire stewards, communities, wildfire practitioners are waiting, raring to go to put fire on the land and to prevent these disasters, prevent these tragedies. But it all stops with liability. You have forest rangers who make virtually nothing. They have 2-year diplomas. It's an old boys club, and they get a proposal for a burn that comes through onto their desk, and they have to pick up the liability for that, and they know darn well that this is a politicized event, and if it goes over 2 hectares of the controlled lines, that's their pension, that's food on their table that they have to consider when they're signing off on these things. If we step back and actually have an honest conversation, this is a natural phenomenon. It doesn't exist in a box. You can't put a little grid on a map and say this is exactly where the burn's going to start, stop, and end. But you're there monitoring to the conditions and not saying on July 10th we're going to burn. You're sitting there with the community and going, when the conditions are right, we're ready to go. It's about empowering that level. That's what can be done. It's about removing that bureaucratic tape. It's about not putting people in positions where they have to take their career into their own hands by doing the right thing.
Moi aussi, il faut que j'attende l'interprétation. Merci. Vous avez parlé de savoir.
Thank you. You talked about Indigenous knowledge. What do you mean by that for this specific case of forest fire?
Thank you. Indigenous knowledge is very much landscape-based. It's knowing the rivers, the trees, the rocks, the winds, how all of that landscape and ecology plays into each other in a localized environment because you've been there forever. You can see the same thing when you talk to farmers about their land. They know their land. They know every corner of it. They know where the coyote den is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These things all influence how a fire behaves on the land. And Indigenous knowledge and fire stewardship, it's so rich and deep in its knowledge of this land and the landscape and how these fires behave and will react to certain conditions. It goes back more than 20,000 years, as I mentioned. So that being the case, when you get to that day where the conditions are perfect, you can tell by what the land's telling you. For example, I was on a traditional burn with Amy in Rocky Mountain House, and I was there with the Banff crew, who are all good friends of mine and great firefighters, some of the best on the planet. And we did the same thing we've done on every wildfire I've ever been on in my career. We sat on a tailgate, got our readout from Edmonton saying, okay, our fine fuel moisture codes are X, Y, and Z, which gives us a readout of this, or head fire intensity should be this, which means that, this, and this. Okay, everybody feel safe? Let's get out there. And then what we all did was the exact same thing. We each went to a different corner of that burn plot without talking about it. We picked up some grass, rubbed in our hands, we smelled it, threw it in the air, did that again. And we came back into the middle. And these are Indigenous fire stewards, they're experienced firefighters, they're non-Indigenous, and we all did the exact same thing. Dane, what's happening in your corner? Well, I noticed over there that, I'm smelling some moisture on the grass and the way that the shadows are tracking, I don't think that's really going to dry up and burn until about 2, 3 p.m. What do you think? Well, over in my corner, it's a bit wind exposed, and you can kind of tell that the way the land's sloping that, this will probably take off, but I don't know if we'll get the energy to go and kind of burn that plot right there. What did those readouts do for us? Nothing. They just helped that liability. This is a landscape-based phenomenon. You need to be experienced. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to understand the landscape. And no one understands that better than those that have stewarded that landscape long before Canada.
OK, on est à 6 minutes, là, Monsieur Trudel.
You had your 6 minutes, Mr. Trudel. Ms. McPherson.
To all the witnesses, this has been very, very interesting, and I'm so in awe of some of the testimony that you've brought forward today. One of the questions that I have, what we're hearing is that if Indigenous knowledge was used, if Indigenous science was used, that there would have been better management of this forest. From what I understand, and I wasn't here for this testimony, but my understanding was that there is there's one person within Parks Canada who is identified as the Indigenous fire expert. I could be wrong on that, but my understanding would be that it would be very difficult, particularly from the testimony that you've just said, Mr. D'Souza, for somebody from one area of the country to be able to represent or to have any sort of understanding of other areas of the country. I'd like your thoughts on that, but I'd also like you perhaps to talk a little bit about how we can decolonize our forest protection across Canada, what that would look like. And I'll start with you, Mr. D'Souza, because you're in the room, and then I'll pass it on to those that are online.
Yeah, I'll start with talking about that individual because he's a good friend of mine, and that individual used to be Amy, who's a mentor and really an idol to me. This is like being with Brian Trottier on the ice right now for me. I'm more of a Darcy Tucker. But that individual, it's not about them having all the knowledge. It's about them having the relationships with the people who do have the knowledge. And that individual is someone who is remarkable at their ability to transcend borders and languages and landscapes and all the, there's so many Indigenous nations even in the area I grew up in Mohkinstsis, Calgary, Alberta. And this individual has that talent, that skill, that ability to make those relationships. So it's not about that one individual carrying all that knowledge, it's about that one individual who's able to connect. And if you could just quickly repeat the second part of the question.
How do we decolonize our firefighting in this country? How does that happen? What are the steps that the government needs to take? I mean, we recognize that we have a racist, we have a deeply colonized structural system in place. How do we fix that?
Don't ever start a meeting with me with a land acknowledgement. That's your first step. I don't need your land acknowledgement. I need you to do some darn work. And that's where it starts. It's about acknowledging this truth. We talk about truth and reconciliation, and the two truths that we reconcile involve land acknowledgements and wearing orange shirts. That's not the truth of my ancestors. That's the truth you've imposed upon us. The truth of my ancestors is this right here. It's a beautiful truth. It's a human truth. Fire stewardship, how we manage and steward the land for the betterment of everyone. That is a truth we can all gather around. We can reconcile. We can take part in. We have individual obligations to this. It's not your office that has an obligation to this. It's you. The people who live and earn and work in this country have an obligation to amplifying that truth, to championing it, to enabling it. That's the reconciliation that's needed here. We talk about decolonization. Decolonization is this: having a conversation, making relationships like that individual I just talked about. That's what it's about, is giving that trust, giving that ability to learn from each other.
Cardinal Christensen, please.
Yep, so I can speak specifically to the role of the Indigenous fire specialist with Parks Canada. So I was in that role as the first one, and it was through my manager at the time, Pierre Martel, and that he just, felt that that was a huge piece that was missing from the fire management picture at Parks Canada. And so I came in and I was part of the National Fire Management Division, which is basically a team that provides a national overview for Parks Canada. But then there's also field units that have their own fire management teams. So what the Indigenous Fire Specialist does is works with people that are in those areas and helps to support them with work that they're doing in their local parks. So that way it's not, one person trying to manage all these complex relationships. It's really that we're trying to support the field units or the parks in doing that work in a good way.
And just to follow up, just to get your comments as well on how we would decolonize the firefighting services that we have, the wildfire fighting services across the country.
Yeah, so I know one of the NDP things that you've been a supporter of is the federal firefighting force. And what I'd ask you to consider is, to look to Indigenous people as that group. And I just can't believe sometimes that we're not already doing Indigenous fire guardians in Canada. It's such an easy win. It gives people jobs, it gets people out on their territory, it increases the health of people and their landscapes, and it also reduces fire risk. So, it's just, to me, something that we can do. And compared to the amount we spend on international folks coming in, it's actually very cheap to do this.
For that. I would like to ask the last question, actually, if I could, of Ms. Gardner. One of the things that we have heard from residents of Jasper is that the recovery has been, the economic recovery has been hampered because so many people work in the tourism industry and many of them weren't able to access EI. I'd like to hear your perspectives on that, and I'd like to hear other pieces of other steps that the federal government could take to support the people of Jasper right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. It speaks to how tourist economies can be precarious and they're very dynamic. And so increasing support for tourist economies to create more stable systems, including reducing the precarity of work, working with associations to try to build more careers in tourism and not be reliant on especially immigration systems that are built for precarity, but instead developing systems that support people to live in a community long term and have that stability is essential. And then in that note, I think that, like we're hearing from Dane and Amy here, it's very important that recovery is community-led, and the path forward needs to be owned by the community. That's essential.
Stop there. We're well over time. We'll go to a very quick second round, a 3-minute round. Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you. A famous German chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, said laws are like sausages, it's better not to see them made, and politics is not for the squeamish. And we are here to ask uncomfortable questions because we need to get the uncomfortable answers. And the fact is, at the very beginning of this study, when we had Minister Guilbeault, parks officials, we had other Minister Sajjan was here, they made claims that everything that could be done had been done. They made claims that no stone had been left unturned in the preparations to prepare Jasper for the fire. And it's only through the efforts of members of this committee, particularly the Conservative members of this committee, who've been fighting for additional meetings, fighting to get answers so that Canadians can learn the truth, that we have had excellent witnesses, such as yourselves and other witnesses that we've had, who have come forward with very compelling evidence that this government did not consider Indigenous knowledge. They did not consider the knowledge of our forest products associations, did not consider the knowledge of foresters like Ken Hodges, who warned this government in 2017 of the risk of fire. And so I do take exception when members of the government team, I know it's uncomfortable for them to have these meetings and to be held accountable, but that's their job, is to be held accountable. It's my job to come and ask witnesses and get the truth for Canadians. And so that's why we're asking these questions. Mr. D'Souza, I'm going to start with you. You've said quite clearly that you think that this fire could have been mitigated. Are you aware of any prescribed burns that were canceled this past year?
In Jasper itself, no, but I don't work for Jasper National Park.
And do you believe, obviously you've said that if we had integrated, you were talking about 100 years ago, looking at photos of Jasper National Park, that there was grasslands. It was not this sea of conifer trees that were prone to wildfire. Do you think that if better forest management, including the Indigenous perspective that you spoke about, could have prevented these fires from happening in Jasper, or at least as intensely as they did?
I think to approach this from the lens of forest management is only to continue all of the mistakes that have led up to this, regardless of the governments that have put them forward. I think stewardship, Indigenous fire stewardship, Indigenous land stewardship is literally the lens that we need to approach this with. Management is far too short-sighted. Management is far too susceptible to the whims of the political winds that affect them. But stewardship is an ongoing relationship and practice of stewarding the land so that they can steward you. I think getting to that place in this country through conversations like this is inspiring.
You know, one of the things that you did say really struck out to me is that you were sickened that, we're not really talking about Lytton or Enterprise in Northwest Territories that was devastated in 2023, or Fort McMurray or Slave Lake. And the reason we're talking about this is because it did happen in a national park, which is under federal jurisdiction. But I think you're absolutely right. These discussions about protecting our communities from fire are very important. Do you think that it's a discussion that we just need to wrap up?
Yeah, unfortunately, we won't have time for the answer, at least at this point, but we'll go to Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Chair. And with 3 minutes, I want to talk to Mr. D'Souza at length. I want to talk to Ms. Gardner, and I want to talk to Ms. Cardinal, so we'll see how that all goes. But tremendous ideas on the reconciliation in action, finding ways to have relationships and to learn new ways of implementing old ways. The review that's ongoing right now, I want to double check that Indigenous people are on the board of the management of the park, or that these ideas are also being discussed where they need to be discussed. Do you know whether any of that is going on?
I can't speak to Jasper specifically, but the relationship that I do have with Banff National Park is exemplary for exactly that. And I think as far as wrapping up this conversation goes, this conversation needs to come to the province.
Thank you. And I mean, we're in a culture that confrontation is the order of the day, and unfortunately, that doesn't help fight some of the challenges that we have together. But again, the lessons from Indigenous people need to be something that we embrace as part of reconciliation in a real way. As you said, not with orange shirts, but with real action. So thank you so much for being here. If I can flip over to the screen, and I'm sorry to cut us short, it's just time. Ms. Gardner, thank you for being such a reasonable voice at the table. The youth in Guelph have been saying to me, instead of fighting each other, why don't you fight climate change and stop fighting each other? And I've really, in the last 9 years, have embraced that message they've given me. When it comes to topics like reconciliation and involving the youth in these discussions, any quick thoughts that you have that you would have liked to have shared on that theme?
Yeah, I think reconciliation is a huge part of this process because the Indigenous worldview demonstrated to take care of the earth so much better than the Western worldview did. And I think that youth are going, that's the future. That is the future, to take that narrative and to shift that paradigm that focuses on social and environmental well-being, because that's what we all want, right? Like that's number one. And the youth will be the one to make that shift. I feel confident in that.
We need youth to be at the tables that we're sitting at, and we need youth to transform politics. So please stay involved. We need you. And Ms. Cardinal, great to see that we have a hero in the room, and I'm really grateful for the work you've done, the mentorship, and for bringing your wisdom to our table.
Merci, Monsieur Longfield. Monsieur Trudel.
Oui, Madame Gardner, moi aussi, je vais...
Well, Ms. Gardner, I have a question as well. Your testimony was very striking in terms of partisanship, but Canada is an oil power, and we are responsible for a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. How to cap the oil sector? The federal government, the Liberals across the way, according to an IMF study, and this isn't Greenpeace, this is the IMF, they said the Canadian government had given $50 billion in direct aid to the oil sector. And the five big oil companies have been making billions of dollars in profit. But we have our two major parties who still promote the oil industry. So how can we have this multi-partisan approach?
J'essaierai d'être brève. Je viens d'une communauté agricole, rurale en Alberta. Ma famille a travaillé dans le pétrole et le gaz. Quand on pense à une transition écologique, il faut penser à une transition du travail.
They can have a livelihood in a different way. We also need to think about our consumption because we're not going to power our current consumption use on renewable energy. So we need to slow things down and get realigned with our energy use if we are going to transition away from oil.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you. It's just a question of time, as Mr. Longfield said before. Ms. McPherson, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A minute and a half is not very much time, but Ms. Gardner, as somebody who is in Jasper, who is a resident of Jasper, can you give us any additional information about what the people of Jasper need from the federal government right now?
I think they need to ask that question to the people on the ground and listen with a willingness to really support them. It's like those are the folks that are going to drive forward and build their community really strong and really beautiful and shape that future. And why Jasper was such a special place was because you could feel the community first. Yes, there were the mountains and all this beauty, but a community thriving is what enables everything else to thrive. And so supporting that community to thrive and listening to what they need and allowing them to shape their own future is essential. And then secondly, absolutely, we need to rebuild broken relationships with the people that were removed, the Indigenous people that were removed from the land, and ensure that they are part of that future as well in a meaningful way, right? And we need to also, last thing I'll say, we need structures and policies that protect our social and economic systems from corporate opportunism, not just in Jasper, but across Canada.
Thank you. Monsieur Deltel, pour 3 minutes.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Deltel, Mr. Chair, I'd like to submit this motion, given that the Jasper wildfire investigation has revealed then Liberal Environment Minister Catherine McKenna was warned in 2017 by multiple forestry experts that a catastrophic fire in Jasper was inevitable if the Liberal government did not act. B, nothing was done to address the landscape of beetle-killed timber to prevent the mega fire of July 22nd, 2024, according to testimony from forestry expert Ken Hodge. And former Liberal Environment Minister Catherine McKenna has refused to testify at the Jasper wildfire investigation on multiple occasions despite repeated requests from the committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 1081, the committee summons former Liberal Minister of Environment and Climate Change Catherine McKenna to appear on November 6, 2024. Chair, this isn't the first time we've asked a minister to appear. You know that we're in... is this in camera? We are in camera. Well, I think we would like to hear from the minister. I think it is self-evident and out of respect for the minister that she should be able to appear and respond to the criticism. We'd like to hear from the member for Yellowhead who had direct conversations with the minister. We'd like her to answer questions. Sir.
Mr. Chair, look, I've said this a number of times already that I think the over-politicization of this issue has gone on far too long. That has been corroborated now by locals, by journalists in the area, by witnesses on this committee, and despite that, the Conservatives seem hell-bent on overly politicizing this and turning it into a political issue when it's one that we're discussing with experts, one that we're discussing with scientists, Indigenous leaders, who virtually unanimously say that there are things that we ought to adopt in terms of policy considerations and recommendations, but they have all asked us to depoliticize and turn down the heat on this overly politicized rhetoric. And I referenced the article entitled "Recipe for Disaster: Misinformation and Wildfire." It was published last week. I would like to send it to all members of the committee so they can read it. But before I do, I'm just going to read some sections that I think are very pertinent to the recommendation that we continue this study and invite former ministers to the meeting. And I quote, "Record dryness, extreme heat, high winds, and a lightning storm. The summer in Jasper National Park, all of the ingredients for a recipe for disaster were in place. Now, 2.5 months later, that disaster came to pass, another set of circumstances. Misinformation, toxic politics, and fact-starved social media blowhards desperately looking to pin blame have lined up to wreak havoc." Moving on, after some discussions on Parkland and Yellowhead counties and who showed up, in particular the aforementioned fire enterprise, Arctic Fire. With reference to that, the article goes on to
just
suggest...
a second, we have a point of order.
Does this have to do with relevance to, we want McKenna here, we want the previous minister here, we just heard testimony that she ignored him, so it's a point of order.
Point of debate, I do see it as relevant, but thank you for the opportunity to thank the witnesses for being here. We're going to have to stop the panel. We were almost done anyway, but fascinating discussion, I must say, and we really appreciated all of you for being here and sharing your time and your thoughts on this issue. I think we've all learned a great deal. So thank you very much. We'll now just go to this debate on future business. But again, thank you for being with us. Mr. Van Koeverden, go ahead and continue.
Thank you, Chair. As I was referring to this article, I'll continue. Jasper said yes. Jasper said yes to resources to help. They said yes early, and they said yes often. They said yes to wildland teams, and they said yes to municipal departments. We kept saying yes, Landon Shepherd said. But they didn't say yes to everyone. Unified Command did not immediately say yes to an independent firefighting business seeking to access Jasper to perform structural protection services for a private company. They did not say yes to a group of trucks and personnel while having had been deployed by the government of Alberta did not have prior arrangements for access. They did not say yes to a self-dispatching team who had not signed an agreement to abide by the ICT's rules of engagement, and they did not say yes to a crew of mercenaries known as Arctic Fire Safety Services, the bulk of whose resources arrived the day after 350 structures burned in Jasper. Mr. Speaker, I'll go on. Mr. Chair, fanning the flames of these politically driven comments sows division, mistrust, and hard feelings among Canadians in general. But amongst Jasperites in particular, the negative rhetoric is wearing on locals, many of whom were involved in the incident and many others who lost their homes and livelihoods to fire and desperately want fact-based answers. Even Jasper's mayor, now well known to Canadians for his diplomacy, fortitude, and tact, weighed in on the scuttlebutt. And I quote, "The present atmosphere of finger-pointing, blaming, and misinformation is beyond merely an annoying distraction. It delays healing. It introduces fresh wounds at a time when we need recovery and unity. Facts matter. What Arctic Fire Safety Services have said about their involvement in Jasper Wildfire Complex is not accurate. Unified Command should not have had to explain why they were not prepared to upend their established processes of deploying resources safely and effectively because some cowboys with big trucks wanted to act on instinct." He goes on to say in the article, "To ignore the bad actors trying to make political hay from our crisis. But if we can put politics aside and filter out good information from bad, Jasper, the town and the park, has all the right ingredients to make its rebuild unprecedented too." And that's what we should be focusing on, not politics, not bringing ministers to this meeting to placate blame, particularly when we had a former member of Parliament for Yellowhead acknowledge that what he said regarding actions following those studies were actually incorrect. So I would provide an amendment to the request to this, and the amendment would simply include with respect to the fact that in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015, due to Harper's deficit reduction action plan cuts, which affected over 1,600 employees at large at Parks Canada and resulted in no burns and no mechanical thinning, no prescribed burns at all in Jasper between 2012 and 2015. With respect to the fact that in 2016, a forest management strategy for mountain pine beetle was developed by our government under the leadership of the aforementioned Minister Catherine McKenna. If we're going to go back in time and revisit all of these actions, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chair, then I would also ask that we ask ministers why they decided to eliminate funding to Jasper National Park, and those ministers would be the Honourable Leanna Aglukak, Minister Peter Kent, and Minister Peter Kent at the time's policy advisor, who happens to be Melissa Landsman. So if you'd like to have Catherine McKenna appear, then those individuals can too.
Yeah, I'm going to need that amendment. I'm going to need that amendment in writing. Excuse me. I'm going to need that amendment in writing. So I don't know where it goes in the motion. Is it a point D? Is that what it is?
Both.
Well, okay,
No,
but
no,
what's the
the
wording
whole-
for it? I need wording.
I would like it in writing and in both languages, please.
Saying add point D.
I'm just adding names to the list.
Oh,
of
okay.
people that
Okay.
we-
Well, I
we
wasn't
invite.
sure. I wasn't sure. Okay. So
You don't have it in writing? And you don't have any?
And the names of those witnesses are the same in English and in French.
but
No,
we
you,
have-
you went on for quite, the amendment was quite
Okay, so
lengthy.
let me just maybe try to understand this. So, given that the committee summoned former Liberal Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Catherine McKenna, and you want to add names.
Former Conservative Environment Ministers Peter Kent and Leona.
Just a second, you're going too fast. No, what's the point of order?
Can you get it in writing? We want them both in French and English. It's
Yeah,
quite
here-
a lengthy amendment.
No, 3 names actually.
Okay.
No, you
let
read
me
for-
finish.
for
Let me
20,
finish. Let me
30
finish.
seconds there.
Yeah, but
Let
that's
me
not
finish.
what my
I'm going
amendment
to
is.
try. I'm going to try and insert this as an amendment, and then we'll see where we stand. Okay. So after Catherine McKenna, comma, former, Mr. Van Couverden, former Environment Minister Leona Aglukak. Is that what? Okay. Comma. What next? What?
Peter Kent.
Former Environment Minister
Peter Kent.
Peter Kent.
And his policy advisor.
And his policy advisor at the time, Melissa Landsman? And is that where it ends? Yes. Okay. To
Point of
appear
order?
on November 6th.
Point of order?
Yes.
You can't,
Just a second. What's the point of order?
You can't suspend. You can't. Members of Parliament.
Summonsing. We're asking them to appear.
You've said that.
I
I'm
did.
not sure
I-
if they explicitly knew.
Maybe you may disconnect and go about your day. I didn't mean to keep you here. Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. You can stay if you want. It's a public meeting, but no, I'm sorry. I didn't make
to my
that clear.
point of
Thank you,
order.
Ms. McPherson.
Back to my
We're
point
not
of order.
summoning anybody. It's
Well,
a motion saying we are inviting and. No, it didn't
you
say,
did.
no. So what we're doing here is after Catherine McKenna, so the wording's the same as the original motion. It's just that we're adding names. So what we're going to do, there is a word, summon, okay, then, okay, so Mr. Van Couverden, maybe I guess you change summon to invite, maybe? Okay.
For all of them.
Okay, so that's the amendment. So we're going to write it down, and we're going to distribute it to everybody by email. But it's not that complicated. We're changing summon to invite, and we're adding Leona Glukak, Peter Kent, and his then policy advisor, Melissa Landsman.
Mr. Chair. Okay.
Okay, a point of order, yes?
I believe there was already an invite sent out to former Minister McKenna, which was declined, and so that the reason for the summons was in order to compel former Minister McKenna to come. It would be appropriate, I think, to maintain the word summon. I know this is kind of a debate, but the invite. Okay.
You can vote against the amendment. Okay.
Sir.
Ms.
Chair.
Taylor-Roy, yes.
Yeah, can I put forward a motion to adjourn because we're over time? This is committee business, and people have to go.
There's a motion to adjourn. We're going to have a vote. We're going to have a vote. Motion to adjourn. We're going to have a vote.
How about a motion to suspend?
We have a motion to adjourn. If that's defeated, then you can have a motion to suspend, though it doesn't, I don't think there's much of a difference in the case of this case. There's, well, just a second, what's the difference between a motion to adjourn? Well, I appreciate it. Okay, so we have a motion to adjourn, and we're going to vote, and then we'll take it from there depending on the result of the vote.
Mr. Ali? Yes. Madame Chatel?
Oui.
Mr. Longfield? Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Vancouverden?
Yes.
Monsieur Dadtel?
No.
Mr. Lloyd?
No.
Mr. Soroka?
No.
Mr. Mazier?
No.
Monsieur Trudel?
Oui.
Ms. McPherson?
Oui.